Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for this lunchtime Q&A session with myself, Nick Charalambous of Alpha Wealth, and Niall O'Sullivan of Common Sense Accounting. We'll get started there. Basically, just to briefly introduce myself, I run a business called Alpha Wealth in Little Island in Cork. We have a small presence in Dublin, and we've been operating as financial advisors, financial planners, dealing with certain, I suppose, industry types. Specifically, we've dealt with a number of dentists over the last number of years as well. And the format for today, and we're going to keep this to a very tight 20-minute session, is to try and give some more information about why dentists should look to incorporate. So without further ado, I might just bring Niall into the conversation, and maybe Niall, you can start. And sorry, I should have said there that we're going to run a poll as well. So for anyone who can see the poll, if you wouldn't mind just maybe clicking on your responses in terms of why you might be interested in the webinar today, and obviously why you're interested in incorporating. So I'll pass it over to you, Niall, if it's okay. And just to start with, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps.
Hi, Nick. Thank you for having me here today. Niall O'Sullivan. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Niall O'Sullivan. I'm a qualified CPA accountant and an auditor, an accountant since 2002 and an auditor since 2009. We have a bookkeeping company and we have a practice called Niall O'Sullivan and Associates. I suppose one of the reasons is, like we have today here that we're discussing ourselves, incorporation gave us many advantages, which we'll go into in a few minutes, and it's exactly the same as we'd recommend for a dentist. We're based in 93 O'Connell Street, O'Connell Street, Limerick, and we also have an office in Killarney in 82 New Street. We have 6 employees, and we have all the standard accountancy services, such as audits, company accounts, sole traders, and recently we've got into fund accounting with a company named Zertra over in Guernsey, so it's a new experience.
Very good. I should have mentioned as well, and I can see there's quite a few people who are present, and thank you again for attending. There is, I suppose, an opportunity to ask questions, and they will be manned, and we will respond to them. And if you want to just populate the Q&A session section of the webinar, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, please feel free to ask any questions that you'd like. We really do want people to get something from this. So, so just to start off, Niall, I suppose to get to the nub of it, can you just explain very briefly and succinctly what are the advantages and disadvantages of a dentist incorporating?
Okay, I suppose to begin with, there's one or two small, you might call them disadvantages. They're really more considerations. I suppose there's a one-off additional cost involved in setting up a company, a limited company, getting your revenue registration together and all that stuff. You're looking at in the region of €500 excluding VAT. And obviously the cost has to outweigh, the benefit has to outweigh the cost. It should at €500. Also the additional, I suppose the additional bookkeeping that you have to do and the reporting to the company's office and people like that, it would happen with any limited company really, not just specifically dentists. On the pro side, you've got all the usual, I suppose, ones that you have for a limited company. You've got the protection of the corporate veil for the shareholders. If the company was insolvent or anything like that, the shareholders are protected from their personal assets being attacked in any way, which is a huge positive. If there was an action of any kind taken against the practice, you know, I suppose worst case you could shut down the company, but personally you're protected again, which is a huge thing in that situation. From your own point of view, Nick, you're probably best to advise on pensions, the company pensions. There's far more benefits to having them in a limited company than being a sole trader. You've got the lower tax rates, even including a company surcharge that's 20% as against 52%. And I suppose the company name is protected forever. Nobody can take your company name once you've got it. So, you know, you've got a level of individuality there as well if you get your name registered at the beginning, if it's accepted by the COO. And I would consider, I suppose, there's a cheap entry cost from the point of view of the €500 fee. You know, we named it as a negative. I don't think it is really.
Very good. And Niall, just for the dentists that are listening to this, and I appreciate some of you may be listening to this on obviously playback. What would you say would be, I suppose, the level of income that a dentist should be earning before they should consider incorporating?
Well, I suppose it's important at this point just to emphasize that every situation is different. Their circumstances are different. It depends about how much personal wealth they have and how much they depend on drawing salaries from their company and things. But in reality, I suppose the general rule is for an individual, a single person, 36,800 is the cutoff. I would say once you're going into the 52% rate and you're paying preliminary tax at a higher rate as well. Sometimes there are other rules, like a married couple have 73,600 if you had your spouse working in the company as well. And also you've got the 45,800 if it was one income earner within the business. But it's all based on the higher rate of tax and the cutoff for that for the individual, really.
Great. So now when I'm speaking to clients and obviously they're looking to set up a company, like the general way that I approach this is to say, well, look, if your business is generating, say, 150,000 euros a year, you're only drawing or need to draw an income of, say, 70,000 of that. The differential, the 80,000 that's left in the company, we generally look then to use vehicles like pension schemes, to set up insurance schemes like life policies, illness policies, and so on, get the business to pay for it without any benefit in kind, and then balance the rest through things like expenses and build up money within the business. Is that generally the same principle?
Yes, I suppose the difference is you don't have to get taxed on it when you're doing it through incorporation, but it's the profits of the company. Your company can pay your pensions, your company can live your life to a large degree, and you take out the salary you need to survive with your social nights out, your family purchases, stuff like that. But the rest is taxed at the 20% rate. And I say 20%, people think the corporation tax is 12.5%, but this is a service company. So on that basis, there's a surcharge of 7.5% as well. Okay. But it's still a lot cheaper than paying 52%.
And have you had any direct experience, Niall, of setting up an incorporation for a dentist?
I have, and I've had a lot of questions off dentists around it, because there's a common perception of dentists can't incorporate. And I suppose to give you the facts on it, and everybody is different again, and even the Irish Dental Association, I've spoken with them, and they speak in the same way. That firstly, they say you have to go to their advisors. The advisory board will decide, and really they advise you that under the Dental Act 1985, which still hasn't been updated, though we've been promised for many years that it will be, they advise you that you shouldn't incorporate it. It's against the Constitution. But then they also say there's no punitive measures for doing so. So you won't get any financial implications, you won't get any reputational implications. So at the end of the day, a number of dentists, a high number of dentists especially in the last 3 to 4 years, have incorporated and have enjoyed the benefits of it, and they've saved huge amounts of money. And the key thing is that you're not going to get disciplined in any way for doing it. It's a choice then that you have to make.
Well, I can certainly reinforce that, Niall, because actually when we set out to advertise for this webinar today, quite a few of the responses were that dentists did incorporate already, so they'd already actually done the process, so it just proves the point. We have had one question come in, and please do feel free to ask more questions on the Q&A chat, please. This one, Niall, came in, it just asked a question saying, hi Niall, if you incorporate, what advice would you give the associate dentist? Should they be employed, PSI, or can they remain self-employed?
Again, it's a decision for each firm to make, or each practice to make on a one-off. I suppose the associate dentist may wish to become an employee. They'll have benefits through social welfare, stamps and everything else like that. It has to suit the employer as well. But then otherwise they remain self-employed, and it just goes into a contract between the limited company and an associate contract essentially between the two individuals.
Very good. And what about practicing the staff, in the practice, Niall? What impact does it have on them, and can they incorporate?
No, they can't as staff. They become employees of the company, which is the other option for the associate essentially. And in that case, it's the same as anywhere else where you're changing that business from a sole trader to a limited company. The continuity of employment comes into it. So you have a bit of paperwork to do around new contracts, new company handbooks, stuff like that. But all their rights remain if they're with the company for 5 years and they start with, if they're with the sole trader for 5 years or the practice and they start with the company, they have 5 years and a day done the day they start over in the company. They don't just have 1 day, and all their rights remain unaffected in that way.
Very good. Now, another question's come through, Niall. This one says, what are the VAT implications, especially when engaging associates?
Again, I keep saying this, but it depends on the circumstances. There's a question around who's providing the service and who's issuing the invoice to the client. And that happens with a sole trader, the same as a limited company. There's no difference in the conditions around it. Only one person or one entity can actually provide the service. So it's who's issuing the invoice is at VAT exempt. So nothing changes really from that point of view.
Okay, and that actually leads on to another question, which is any implications on VAT if they remain self-employed as they are providing a service as such?
It's exactly the same, because as an associate, you're still two separate entities. So there's no major difference between the operation of the business. And it's a contentious question, to be honest with you. With any trade, like orthopedics, different people like that as well, physios, anyone who's taking on staff in that way, are they renting the room or are they providing a service? So it's kind of you have to understand the situation for each dentist or dental practice to be able to give a straight answer and an answer that's 100% clear and correct in that situation.
And Niall, for the dentists that are, I suppose, listening today and obviously on the playback, who have an accountant or have spoken to an accountant in the past that has said that they shouldn't incorporate, is there any advice that you can give them, or how would you kind of, I suppose, position yourself in terms of maybe talking to them or giving them some guidance?
I suppose, firstly, I'm happy to talk to anyone, give an opinion. I don't want to step on another accountant's toes, but I'm quite happy to give my opinion on any situation. The accountant may have his reasons, and again, it goes down to the circumstances behind it. The only thing I'd say is, why has the accountant said no? Is it just a flat no because of all the years gone by, people refuse to do it? Or is it because he's looked at the facts and he's come back and he said, no, it doesn't suit your dental practice for any reason? I can't see a reason why it wouldn't, from the point of view of it saves you on the tax rate. It also saves you on the preliminary tax. Let's not forget that as another positive, that if you have a tax bill of 30,000 and you pay preliminary of 30, and if that goes down to 7,000 or 8,000 in a company, you're only paying 7,000 or 8,000 preliminary on top of it as well. So, there's a huge saving there as well. But the accountant may have his reasons to answer your question. I would find it very unusual. I think the only question you can ask really in an incorporation situation is, if you own the premises that you're practicing from, do you want to keep the building out of the company or do you want to bring it into the company? Okay,
that's a really good point. And I suppose, Niall, it kind of reinforces the fact that I would encourage people that they should get advice. And typically, obviously you have a lot of expertise in this area, even if it's a case of just trying to either reinforce what they've been told or to go back with some maybe clarification and give them something more than just, obviously a flat no. Niall, another question has come through, and again, please do feel free to keep asking the questions, guys. We've got another sort of 5 minutes or so we're happy to take any questions that anyone asks, and we will make sure that we do respond to them. This one is there any issue with PI insurance if associates become employees? Is company then jointly liable on the PI claim as now employees as opposed to self-employed?
I don't know, if I'm being honest with you, but I would say the same thing as I'd always say here. What happens in the practice in that situation from an insurance point of view? Nothing has changed here, only you've changed the entity. And you have an extra level of protection for the shareholders and directors of the company. But with regard to an action being taken and that, I've never come across it being an issue, to be honest with you. But I don't know the answer to that. I can come back to that person and get a
Okay,
bit of
very good.
clarity.
Well, again, if the individual wants to maybe come back to us, Niall's details will be made available on the follow-up that we'll send out, and we will share the video with people if they have missed any part of this presentation. And indeed, they can feel free to ask any questions of either myself or Niall. This is a question that's come in. I thought you have to declare VAT when turnover is greater than 37,500. So are you obliged to charge patients VAT when in the company?
No, it's no different to the practice as a sole trader. Medical is exempt, and it probably goes back to the question before that: who's creating the service here? And in my eyes, it's always the limited company issue the invoice to the patient, and you know, the associates and everybody else are working, or the employees are working for the company the same as they were working for the practice.
Okay, very good. And another question, Niall, what are the implications of owning the practice premises, which I think was something you touched on earlier?
Yes, again, it's specific to the circumstances. It depends on if there's a mortgage on it and if you want to transfer everything into the limited company as part of it. Sometimes getting, if you want to go with the complex tax elements of it, sometimes getting a sale of a building ends up with double taxation unless you're selling the whole company to somebody in that situation. So a lot of the time people advise that you do a lease agreement between the limited company and the individual, the owner of the business, the sole trader, and they will pay rent over in that form, which will cover the mortgage payment, but will be assessable under income tax then as rental income.
Okay, very good.
It's again, that's not a specific rule. It depends on the circumstances and what the debt is and everything else in the company.
Another question's come through, Niall. So it says here, the sale of a practice, is there any advantages, disadvantages of selling a company versus a sole trader?
Again, it comes down to tax planning. There's no major difference, I suppose. You just have to decide: are you selling the company, or are you selling the assets within the company, the debtors, creditors, the trade? You know, in another way. But it's capital gains tax on the sale. You know, and but there will be your standard exemptions that you get for selling a business, no matter what.
Okay.
There's no income. There's no difference between income tax and so it's a capital gain situation. Okay,
perfect. Okay, so we have 1 or 2 minutes left. If anyone would like to ask a final question, please do so now. Thank you very much again for the participation thus far. In terms of the poll, and I appreciate for those of you that have completed the poll, I think there's a resounding kind of yes to all of the reasons for incorporating, which I think Niall has kind of eloquently explained this afternoon. Just, I suppose, while we are wrapping up, just to mention to you that I've worked with Niall for several years now. I have to say, Niall is the one that gave me I suppose the opinion in terms of, you know, dentists incorporating. I've, you know, dealt with Niall over many clients, and I have to say I have great faith and I suppose respect for Niall, and I would encourage you all at least to get some more information. Obviously, you've gone one step in joining this webinar and listening to I suppose the points that Niall's making. I think it's a huge opportunity. I really do, and I believe that. In relation to, I suppose, where Alpha Wealth fit, we are an independent brokerage ourselves. We provide complimentary reviews to dentists, where if you want some advice around kind of pension planning, around insurances, I've spoken about, you know, if you are to incorporate, or indeed if you remain self-employed, what the opportunities are there. And it's always about just checking in and seeing where you're at in terms of your financial life cycle and whether you should be making appropriate provisions, and really about balance. The key thing about financial planning for me is that you ensure that you're appropriately balanced in the various different areas, whether it be retirement planning, whether it be saving for various different purposes, either within or outside of the business. And indeed, this may also impact on employees, just in terms of making sure that, again, appropriate advice. Obviously, there's a requirement to give them a facility to a pension scheme, but also in terms of other areas that can best suit your practice. There's one last question that came through, Niall, which was, would you recommend a partnership between owner and associates?
As against a limited company?
I presume, yeah, that it wasn't asked, but
it's going back to the tax rates, really, for me, from that point of view. In a partnership, it's income tax And it goes back to the same question: who's providing the service? In a lot of cases, the invoice is going from the owner of the business. You know, they want to have the image behind that as well, even though the associate may take the money or may split it 50-50 or whatever way they do it. But for me, I think if you're self-employed, you're going down that route of a partnership. And if it's a limited company, it's done that way with the associate. There still has to be an agreement either way between the associate and the owner of the business.
Okay, very good. Yeah, no, I think that did answer that question. Well, listen, we're at 20 minutes now, so I am going to wrap it up there. Niall, is there anything that you'd like to kind of finish off with or to say just before we do close up?
No, just that I'm available if anybody wants to ask a question. I don't want to step on any other accountant's toes because they know the circumstances better, but I'm quite happy to give an opinion and give an answer where I can, and where not, I'll go back and I'll research it.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you very much, Niall. I'd like to thank you all for joining today's webinar. And as I say, we will share the video with you. And indeed, if anyone does want to ask any question, there is no obligation. Really, today's about an information session, and we're happy to kind of share further information as to how this can benefit your practice and indeed yourselves personally. Thank you very much again, guys, and have a great weekend. And hopefully we speak to you soon. Thanks again. Thanks, Niall. Take care.